Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Lion Tribe. We are now on episode 8. I want to humbly apologize for taking so long to get to this episode, but as promised, I am continuing on in my three-part series, reading from the American Academy of Pediatrics article that I had started on the last episode. Remember, this is from the policy statement that they published in 2018, which is an article titled Ensuring Comprehensive Care and Support for Transgender and Gender Diverse Children and Adolescents. So, my goal in doing this three-part series is just to call out some of the lies from the American Academy of Pediatrics. These people who call themselves medical professionals are pushing an ideology that's dangerous for children, and they need to be called out for it. I'm just one man, but there are plenty of other people doing it. Thank God. But I digress. Let's get this started. The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. All right, as you recall, the section of the article that I was reading from is mental health implications. So let me continue where I left off. I'm going to reread some of it. Youth who identify as TGD, which stands for Transgender and Gender Diverse, experience disproportionately high rates of homelessness, physical violence at home and in the community, substance abuse, and high-risk sexual behaviors. Among the 3 million HIV testing events that were reported in 2015, the highest percentage of new infections were among women who identified as transgender, and were also at particular risk for not knowing their HIV status. Why do transgender youth have higher rates of homelessness? That's the question I want you to think about right now. The assumption that they want you to make is that they're homeless because their families and their friends are rejecting them for who they are. Rejection is, of course, a possible factor, but when family and friends say things like, "We don't believe it's possible for you to change your gender because there are only two. We'll support you psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, so that you can acknowledge this reality." That's much different than people who say, "You disgust us. You're a filthy tranny, and you don't deserve a place in our home." The former statement is honest and helpful. It serves to encourage a gender-confused person to see him or herself for who and what she was born as. The latter is, of course, unsupportive, and it would only serve to alienate a trans child. Not all people are like the latter, and I suspect that most parents, especially, are willing to support their children towards true mental health. So, are the homelessness rates due to true rejection, or just youth running away in search of others who will tell them the comforting lies that they want to hear? Now, the article mentions physical violence at home and in the communities. Growing up, as a boy, I was always taught the sacred and well-known phrase that a man should never hit a woman. There is much wisdom in that phrase, although it's not entirely true. But I could spend plenty of time explaining why there's wisdom in that phrase, but I'm not going to do that. I'll just say this. Men are, overall, they are physically more aggressive, and they're physically stronger than women, period. The lies of radical gender theory, they blur gender lines, thereby erasing traditional protections like that. When the distinctions of men and women are gone, such as they are in the LGBTQ/ETC community, think about the implications of that. When they get into domestic disputes with one another, men should never hit a woman. Phrases like that, sayings like that, it's out the window. What stops an argument between a transgender couple from turning into a fist fight when they see each other as physical, emotional, and aggressive equals. So, in a June 2022 article, the U.S. Department of Justice, their Office of Justice Programs, published a paper titled Violent Victimization by Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, 2017 to 2020. So, I'm just going to include the highlights from that article. The rate of violent victimization of lesbian or gay persons was more than 2 times the rate for straight persons. The rate of violent victimization against transgender persons was 2.5 times the rate among cisgender persons. About 58% of violent victimizations of lesbian or gay persons were reported to police. Domestic violence was 8 times as high among bisexual persons and more than twice as high among lesbian or gay persons as it was among straight persons. Violent victimizations of bisexual persons, 31%, were less likely to be reported to police than violent victimizations of straight persons, 45%. The violent victimization rate for bisexual females was 8 times the rate for straight females. Now keep in mind, when statistics like this are mentioned in articles, the researchers rarely delve into who the perpetrators are who are committing the violent acts against the LGBTQ ETC community. What are the motives of the researchers and the journalists when they tell you these statistics without clarifying? I suspect they intentionally leave you guessing so they can keep insinuating that the violence is motivated by hate directed at the LGBTQ ETC folks who are for who and what they are. But the more you look into various sources, the clearer the picture tends to be. Nearly all violence against the LGBTQ ETC community is caused by the LGBTQ ETC community. In a January 2021 article titled At Greater Risk, Transgender and Domestic Violence, this was published by the Violence Prevention Center, Southwestern Illinois. So it states, while domestic violence affects every population, the transgender community is victimized at a higher rate. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 30 to 50% of transgender people experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. That is a big difference from the 28 to 33% in the general population. Intimate partner violence is higher. So that means trans folks are hurting each other more than the average couple that isn't gender confused. Now, going back to the bit at the beginning of the video about the HIV rates being higher in women who identify as transgender, I wanted to bring that point back up because I have a couple verses from Scripture. Romans chapter 1, verses 26 and 27 say, For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. All right, so receiving in themselves that recompense or repayment. This is talking about LGBTQ folks. The scripture is referencing the fact that they receive what's due unto them, the repayment of their error, of the sin that they are committing, the sin that is due unto them. I bring that up because people take these lifestyles lightly, even some Christians, they want to try to treat these lifestyles like they're normal. But Christians, conservatives, you've got to stand on the truth of the Word of God, and you've got to stand on the truth of science. I read all those statistics off because and the scriptures, because I want people to know that living those lifestyles, whether you believe they are true or whether you believe people are born that way or not, you put yourself at higher risk for sexually transmitted diseases, domestic violence, and just other violence in general. Let me continue on in the article. In the section called Gender Affirmative Care, it says, in a gender affirmative care model, GACM, pediatric providers offer developmentally appropriate care that is oriented toward understanding and appreciating the youth's gender experience. A strong, non-judgmental partnership with youth and their families can facilitate exploration complicated that's a typo in their article. Exploration of complicated emotions, what I should say. Of and gender diverse expressions while allowing questions and concerns to be raised in a supportive environment. Okay. So if we're talking about what's developmentally appropriate, a truly developmentally appropriate approach wouldn't even mention such a thing as gender spectrum because it doesn't exist. Physicians are seen as authoritative figures, especially by patients and their families. In what world is it developmentally appropriate to have an authoritative figure lying to mentally vulnerable patients and telling them that they're born in the wrong body? In what world is that even ethical for a medical professional to do? These are lies, folks. Objective truth matters in medicine. This radical gender ideology that has infiltrated the field of medicine has diluted reality so much so that you can't even get a straight answer on what a man or a woman is from a med school expert that's totally sold out to it. All right, next statement in the article says, in a GACM, the following messages are conveyed. Transgender identities and diverse gender expressions do not constitute a mental disorder. This is, of course, a lie. The American Psychological Association should never have been allowed to change the classification of gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. Remember, on the last video, I read from a source that explained one of the reasons for doing this was to reduce stigma. They don't want people calling gender-confused people disordered. Why not? Well, because they want us all to view gender-confused people as normal. Not only is gender confusion a disorder, folks, but I personally feel that it should be called gender dysmorphia. This would place it into a category that's similar to body dysmorphia, an abnormal mental condition where a person sees him or herself as too fat or too skinny when the opposite is actually true, or they're average sized. Such is the case with people who struggle with, of course, anorexia and bulimia. All right, next statement in the article says, variations in gender identity and expression are normal aspects of human diversity. Variations in identity? No. Variations in expression? Yes, of course. Human beings can express themselves in a variety of ways, but you cannot have a variety of identities. So, obviously, if you're calling yourself Sally when your name is actually Bob, or your name was actually Bob just yesterday, you're deluded. You're a little bit confused, folks. Maybe more than a little bit. Anyways, to spread these lies, they conflate a little bit of truth with the lie to get you buying the garbage. They talk about gender expression. Like I said, you can express your gender in many different ways. That's true. But you cannot have multiple identities. That makes you sound like you're possessed with devils. We are legion. I'm telling you, folks, we've got to call out this crap. All right, continuing on in the article, it says, let's see, gender, let me repeat the last part. Variations in gender identity and expression are normal aspects of human diversity, and binary definitions of gender do not always reflect emerging gender identities. Gender identity evolves as an interplay of biology, development, socialization, and culture. And if a mental health issue exists, it most often stems from stigma and negative experiences rather than being intrinsic to the child. Now, here they are, of course, trying to blame mental illness on outside sources again. It's a way to shift blame for anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts on everyone who isn't accepting of the radical gender cult. Let me continue in the article again. The GACM is best facilitated through the integration of medicine, mental health, and social services, including specific resources, and supports for parents and families. Providers work together to destigmatize gender variance, promote the child's self-worth, facilitate access to care, educate families, and advocate for safer community spaces where children are free to develop and explore their gender. A specialized gender affirmative therapist, when available, may be an asset in helping children and their families build skills for dealing with gender-based stigma, address symptoms of anxiety or depression, and reinforce the child's overall resiliency. There is a limited but growing body of evidence that suggests that using an integrated affirmative model results in young people having fewer mental health concerns, whether they ultimately identify as transgender. So one of the points they're making is that the more authority figures you have lying to the kids, the less the children will have to mentally wrestle with reality. That's the essential point they're making, whether it's intentional or not. It's similar to raising kids believing in Santa Claus. You have nearly everyone in on the lie, and the kids don't catch on until later, whether by a peer or by one or two authority figures who refuse to participate in the charade, or by the child naturally catching on. On the surface, and maybe in the short term, this would seem to make sense. That if everyone is on board, then mental illness is reduced. It would seem to make sense that that's true. But children eventually grow up, which means their understanding of the world matures. Reality shows up. As evidence, see the ever-growing number of detransitioning adults who feel betrayed by healthcare professionals. All right, back to the article. In contrast, conversion or reparative treatment models are used to prevent children and adolescents from identifying as transgender or to dissuade them from exhibiting gender diverse expressions. I'm going to pause for a second because they want you to automatically hear conversion therapy, hear that phrase, and consider it as a dirty phrase or dirty word. Because they want you to think that stopping children from being transgender, stopping them from socially transitioning, chemically transitioning, is dangerous for them. And they want you to think of that as conversion therapy, because conversion therapy has a wide range of uses. It's been used in the past in various ways. Some not so great, but generally, it's an umbrella term to mean multiplicity of approaches to prevent a child from buying into the lies of the radical gender cult. They don't want you to stop that. They don't want you to reinforce the truth to the child, that they were born as the beautiful and wonderful creature and human being that God intended them to be from day one. Children deserve the truth. All right, continuing the article. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has concluded that any therapeutic intervention with the goal of changing a youth's gender expression or identity is inappropriate. So that's SAMHSA. Remember that acronym, because you might see it popping up around these communities. Reparative approaches have been proven to be not only unsuccessful, but also deleterious, and are considered outside the mainstream of traditional medical practice. The AAP described reparative approaches as unfair and deceptive. So they're saying it's unfair and deceptive to tell kids the truth. At the time of this writing, conversion therapy was banned by executive regulation in New York and by legislative statutes in 9 other states, as well as the District of Columbia. Pediatric providers have an essential role in assessing gender concerns and providing evidence-based information to assist youth and families in medical decision-making. Not doing so can prolong or exacerbate gender dysphoria and contribute to abuse and stigmatization. If a pediatric provider does not feel prepared to address gender concerns when they occur, then referral to a pediatric or mental health provider with more expertise is appropriate. There is little research on communication and efficacy with transfers in care for youth who identify as TGD, particularly from pediatric to adult providers. All right, next section is developmental considerations. Acknowledging that the capacity for emerging abstract thinking in childhood is important to conceptualize and reflect on gender, on identity, gender affirmation guidelines are being focused on individually tailored interventions on the basis of the physical and cognitive development of youth who identify as TGD. So what they're saying right there is, as children advance in their knowledge, they have to increase the web of lies to make it harder for them to untangle from it. Of course, they're not actually saying that. I'm saying that. I'm interpreting it, what they're saying as that. All right. Next part. Accordingly, research substantiates that children who are prepubertal and assert an identity of TGD know their gender as clearly and as consistently as their developmentally equivalent peers who identify as cisgender and benefit from the same level of social acceptance. So, they're making the claim that even before puberty, children know that they are in the wrong body. Yeah. A point I wanted to make is that they want parents, schools, and communities lying to gender-confused kids as early as possible. Those of us who oppose radical gender theory have the strong suspicion as to why. The gender affirming care in the medical field is a huge profit generator. And I mean, literally, there are thousands, in fact, millions of dollars to be made. All right, back to the article again. This developmental approach to gender affirmation is in contrast to the outdated approach in which a child's gender diverse assertions are held as possibly true, this is their quote, of course, until an arbitrary age, often after pubertal onset, when they can be considered valid, an approach that authors of the literature have termed watchful waiting. This outdated approach does not serve the child because critical support is withheld. Of course, like I said, they want you to start this stuff as early as possible because they have medicine they want to get these children on. That medicine costs money, by the way. It's not free. Watchful waiting is based on binary notions of gender in which gender diversity and fluidity is pathologized. Pathologized. Did I say that right? Pathologized? In watchful waiting, it is also assumed that notions of gender identity become fixed at a certain age. The approach is also influenced by a group of early studies with validity concerns, methodologic flaws, and limited follow-up on children who identified as TGD and, by adolescence, did not seek further treatment. Desisters. So, without meaning to, they're admitting that they are frustrated that children grew out of their gender confusion and they didn't get to catch them in their net and hook them into the GAC model for the rest of their lives. More robust and current research suggests that rather than focusing on who a child will become, valuing them for who they are, even at a young age, fosters secure attachment and resilience, not only for the child, but also for the whole family. Oh, how precious. Letting a child play pretend as young as possible and taking that pretend serious. Yes, when my 4-year-old comes up to me and tells me, "Daddy, my name's Marilyn Monroe now, and I'm a millionaire," I have to honor that, folks. If he says it, it must be true. That's what these medical professionals are telling us. If he wants to change his name to Marilyn Monroe, if he wants to wear a dress, I have to do what these medical professionals are saying. No, I don't. Not going to happen. The current woke establishment medical approach is to fast-track kids onto the conveyor belt of medicalization. Not just by one discipline, either. As the article mentioned, they deliver an approach that requires these kids to be seen by a pediatrician, endocrinologists, psychiatrists, and counselors, and eventually surgeons. Money, money, money for the establishment. Why take a slow approach that reinforces the children's innate emotional, biological, and spiritual worth when we can get them believing that they're born in the wrong body at 7, 8, or 9? Honestly, these people sicken me, folks. And I hope they sicken you too, enough to act on this sickness, act in a manner that would protect these children the most. Next part of the article is called medical management. Ooh, this is where it gets a little bit fun. Pediatric primary care providers are in a unique position to routinely inquire about gender development in children and adolescents as part of recommended well child visits, and to be a reliable source of validation, support, and reassurance. They are often the first provider to be aware that a child may not identify as cisgender, or that their may be distress related to a gender diverse identity. The best way to approach gender with patients is to inquire directly and non-judgmentally about their experience and feelings before applying any labels. Now, it is that unique position of pediatric providers, coupled with their professional obligation to tell the truth, that should drive all of them to morally treat their patients with proper care. By that, I mean do not refer them to radical gender theory quacks who are going to lie to them. Pediatricians can and should, in fact, advocate for the protection of children from unethical practices, from medical abuse. Continuing the article. Many medical interventions can be offered to youth who identify as TGD and their families. The decision of whether and when to initiate gender affirmative treatment is personal and involves careful consideration of risks, benefits, and other factors unique to each patient and family. Many protocols suggest that clinical assessment of youth who identify as TGD is ideally conducted in an ongoing basis in the setting of a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach, which, in addition to the patient and family, may include the pediatric provider, a mental health provider, preferably with expertise in caring for youth who identify as TGD, social and legal supports. Why do these kids need legal support, folks? Are they expecting them to be sued or to sue others? Consider what they mean by legal support. All right. And pediatric endocrinologist or adolescent medicine gender specialist, if available. There is no prescribed path, sequence, or endpoint. No prescribed endpoint. Ain't that cute? A patient cured is a patient lost. Am I right? Providers can make every effort to be aware of the influence of their own biases. The medical options also vary depending on pubertal and developmental progression. All right, next section is clinical setting. In the past year, 1 in 4 adults who identified as transgender avoided a necessary doctor's visit because of fear of being mistreated. All clinical office staff have a role in affirming a patient's gender identity, making flyers available or displaying posters related to LGBTQ health issues, including information for children who identify as TGD and families, reveals inclusivity and awareness. Generally, patients who identify as TGD must feel most comfortable when they have access to a gender-neutral restroom. Diversity training that encompasses sensitivity when caring for youth who identify as TGD and their families can be helpful in educating clinical and administrative staff. A patient-asserted name and pronouns are used by staff and are ideally reflected in the electronic medical record without creating duplicate charts. Doctors, nurses, aides, secretaries, you do not have a role in affirming someone's gender identity. No matter how much your workplace encourages, pressures, or coerces you, do not lie to your patients. These orders are coming from the top down because healthcare workers put up with it. We don't have to. Avoid the temptation to go along, take the path of least resistance. Avoid that. If you're in an authoritative role and you are lying to a little boy or a little girl about their gender to spare feelings or to keep your job, think about the ethical implications of that. You're willing to basically sell your soul to this radical gender cult just to keep your stinking job. You're willing to lie, to wound your conscience, knowing that it is wrong. If we do not stand up for objective truth, if we don't stand up for objective truth when treating and caring for patients, then what are we left with? If we let patients determine their genders, their own realities, then who exactly are the experts? This nonsense is going to take a metaphorical army of healthcare professionals who refuse to yield to this garbage if we hope to see it stopped and reversed. Over the past couple years, because of the handling of COVID-19, whether it be by medical experts, whether it be by politicians, news outlets, the mismanagement of things has eroded the public's trust in medicine. One way to regain some trust from the public would be for doctors, nurses, pharmacists to stand up against these radical gender lies. Our patients deserve to hear the truth from us. Sometimes I get a little too serious, folks. I apologize. Let me smile for you. That's a little creepy. Sorry. Enjoy that for Halloween. Continuing the article. The U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology require all electronic health records certified under the Meaningful Use Incentive Program to have the capacity to confidentially collect information on gender identity. Explaining and maintaining confidentiality procedures promotes openness and trust, particularly with youth who identify as LGBTQ. Now, of course, in medicine, you're supposed to maintain confidentiality for all patients. But I suspect that the authors of this article are specifically referencing maintaining confidentiality for youth, even from their parents. In fact, what's the next sentence say? Maintaining a safe clinical space. Oh, safe space in medicine for the youth. It can provide at least one consistent, protective refuge for patients and families, allowing authentic gender expression and exploration that builds resiliency. Pause for drink. Safe clinical space. Well, how groomerific of you, American Academy of Pediatrics. Parents, grandparents, guardians of the precious treasures that are our children. We have all got to be on high alert that other adults in whom we place trust in to care for our children aren't part of the safe space brigade. If you so much as catch a glimpse of a rainbow or trans jewelry, banners, clothing, handouts, or books in the vicinity where you bring your children, I recommend you start asking some questions. Just like the school employees that keep getting exposed by libs of TikTok on the internet for coming out to their students and vice versa. A clinic full of staff that supports this stuff likely would not hesitate to keep you in the dark if your child asks for them to. If you do notice these safe space symbols, keep your cool. Don't be rude, condescending. Don't be confrontational. In fact, you might be able to glean information from these clinics, from the clinic staff, by pretending to be open and curious about their stance and their policies on these. The more information you gather, the stronger the case against them when it comes time for the legal hammer to come down on them. And at no point should you leave your child alone with them if you can help it. All right, Last section of the article that I'm going to read for this episode is pubertal suppression. Gonadotropin releasing hormones have been used to delay puberty since the 1980s for central precocious puberty. These reversible treatments can also be used in adolescents who experience gender dysphoria to prevent development of secondary sex characteristics and provide them time up until 16 years of age for the individual and the family to explore gender identity, access psychosocial supports, develop coping skills, and further define appropriate treatment goals. If pubertal suppression treatment is suspended, then endogenous puberty will resume. All right, so the use of the word reversible, that's very generous. Here's why. Imagine a parent consents to their child going on pubertal suppression until the age of 16. So with girls, you got to consider puberty starts between the ages of 8 and 13, boys 9 to 14. They could be intentionally hindering the normal progression of human growth in their children for 7 to 8 years. These are crucial years for young males to see normal changes, like increased facial hair, chest hair, increased body hair, pelvic build. They have a lack of rounded hips, upper body muscular build for boys, the ability to generate muscle mass quickly. For females, we know the normal experiences are thicker hair on top of their head. They have rounded hips compared to boys. They have a decreased ability to generate muscle mass at a fast rate. They have decreased upper body strength, breasts, the ability to nurse any babies that they would have, normal menstrual cycle, and increased body fat makeup. Now all this is beside the further external shaping of their genitalia. I'm going to continue in the AAP article. Often, pubertal suppression creates an opportunity to reduce distress that may occur with the development of secondary sexual characteristics and allow for gender-affirming care, including mental health support for the adolescent and the family. It reduces the need for later surgery because physical changes that are otherwise irreversible, protrusion of the Adam's apple, male pattern baldness, voice change, breast growth, etc., are prevented. The available data reveal that pubertal suppression in children who identify as TGD generally leads to improved psychological functioning in adolescence and young adulthood. Pubertal suppression is not without risks. Delaying puberty beyond one's peers can also be stressful and can lead to lower self-esteem and increased risk-taking. That last phrase, increased risk-taking. Usually when researchers use that phrase, when they're talking about teens and adolescents, what they're referring to is drugs, alcohol, unsafe driving, multiple sexual partners, or maybe they're involved in intimate partner violence. Remember though, those statistics of domestic abuse being much higher among trans populations. Remember? Yeah. All right, next sentence in the article says, some experts believe that genital underdevelopment may limit some potential reconstructive options. Genital underdevelopment may limit potential reconstructive options. This goes right back to their use of the word reversible. The claim is that kids can go on puberty blockers and pause the normal processes of the human body without lasting effects. Then they admit in the exact same section on this article that genital underdevelopment will happen. This makes sense because you can imagine a child coming off of puberty blockers with less than average sized genitals compared to their peers, and they find it out. Suppose they change their minds and they do desist from transitioning. What's going to go through the minds of those children when their genitals don't look like that of their peers? As if their mental struggles aren't already compiled enough as it is. Continuing the article. Research on long-term risks, particularly in terms of bone metabolism and fertility, is currently limited and provides varied results. Wait a minute. So we're putting kids on puberty blockers where the research on long-term risks on bone metabolism and fertility is currently limited. Keep in mind, this article is in 2018, but they had already been doing this for years. Families often look to pediatric providers for help in considering whether pubertal suppression is indicated in the context of their child's overall well-being as gender diverse. I want to make a couple points on the gonadotropin releasing hormone. And on a website that I dug up that's called yourhormones.info, they explain the following. What is gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH? Gonadotropin releasing hormone is produced and secreted by specialized nerve cells in the hypothalamus of the brain. It is released into tiny blood vessels that carry this hormone from the brain to the pituitary gland, where it stimulates the production of two more hormones, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These hormones are released into the general circulation and act on the testes and ovaries to initiate and maintain their reproductive functions. Follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone control the levels of hormones produced by the testes and ovaries, such as testosterone, estradiol, or most people know that by estrogen, and progesterone. And these are important in the controlling and production of sperm in men and the maturation and release of an egg during each menstrual cycle in women. How is gonadotropin releasing hormone controlled? During childhood, the levels of gonadotropin releasing hormone are extremely low. But as puberty approaches, there is an increase in gonadotropin releasing hormone, which triggers the onset of sexual maturation. And that's the end of the quotes from that article. So, but on the subject of puberty blockers for transgender and gender diverse youth at mayoclinic.org, they say the medications most commonly used to suppress puberty are known as gonadotropin releasing hormone analogs. Here's what you need to know about the benefits, side effects, and long-term effects. That's all I'm going to read on that article from Your Hormones website. On the subject of puberty blockers for transgender and gender diverse youth at mayoclinic.org, they say the following. The medications most commonly used to suppress puberty are known as gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH analogs. Here's what you need to know about the benefits, side effects, and long-term effects. Pause for a second. Now, we've heard quite enough about the supposed benefits that are touted by those who favor gender affirmation. So I skipped down in the article, and I'm only going to read now the negative effects, that at least the ones that they're willing to admit to. What are the possible side effects and complications? It's important for your child to stay on schedule with all related medical appointments. Contact your child's doctor if any changes cause you or your child concern. Possible side effects of GnRH analog treatment include injection site swelling, weight gain, hot flashes, headaches. Use of GnRH analogs might also have long-term effects on growth spurts, bone growth and density, future fertility, depending on when puberty blockers are started. Children may have their height checked every 3 months. Bone density is also checked periodically. If bone growth or density is a concern, your child's health care provider might prescribe a different medication, stop the treatment with GnRH analogs, or recommend the best time to start cross-hormone therapy. That's the end of that. Remember, when doctors and nurses use words like pause or reversible when referring to puberty blockers for gender identity, they're being deceptive. Whether they're meaning to or not, they are lying to patients and families. Every single side effect and long-term effect of these puberty blockers that I just mentioned, they can be avoided by, drumroll, not putting kids on puberty blockers. They can be avoided by telling kids the truth, that there's no such thing as any third, fourth, or 56th gender. By encouraging kids to be who they truly are, who they were born as. That's true affirmation. Puberty cannot be paused like some sort of video game or movie. Now, when I was younger, I used to be a pretty good Super Mario Bros. Aficionado. Let me tell you, if you jump Mario over a bad guy to stomp his head out, and you hit the pause button right before that happens, the game screen freezes. Okay? And then as soon as you hit pause again to unpause the game will resume in the exact same pattern and sequence of actions that were about to occur before you hit pause the first time. That bad guy's head's going to get flattened. So, this is not the case, though, with children. Children who are put on puberty blockers with the expectation of resuming any form of normalcy, if they change their minds later, it's not going to happen. So here's the deal, gender affirmers. Stop your bold-faced lying to children. Better yet, join the side of beneficence. The side wanting the bodily safety of children protected. Help to preserve their mental, physical, and emotional well-being the right way, by being honest. It's not always easy to tell the truth, especially in today's world of cancel culture. Telling the truth publicly puts you at risk. Standing for the truth means you could very well be mocked, ridiculed, metaphorically or literally assaulted. You could lose relationships with family and friends. You could lose your ability to provide for yourself and your family. But what you gain is worth so much more than all that. Your dignity and honor in knowing that you stood strong in the face of all of that threat will be intact. More than anything, your conscience toward God Almighty can remain clean in that particular matter. It will take guts to put everything on the line for truth, but you won't be alone. Big names in society are lighting metaphorical torches all around the country on this subject. Matt Walsh, he's gaining lots of ground in this. Michael Knowles, Stephen Crowder, John Cooper, Governor Ron DeSantis, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, Tucker Carlson, James Lindsay, Colin Wright, Allie Beth Stuckey, Sarah Gonzalez. I could keep going on and on. These are big name conservatives. But there are even some liberals who are joining up and fighting this nonsense. They can't defend children by themselves. I can't defend children by myself. We have to rally together. Which brings me to my final closing statements. The Lion Tribe is here to defend children. We need your help. Any amount that you can contribute to the tribe can help me and my friends grow the cause. The tribe has both a full website and a donation link, which brings you to GiveSendGo, because I surely am not going to use GoFundMe. Now, do me a favor, like and share this video, comment, and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you're not already. Remember, folks, be bold as lions.